In this lesson, we will look at moving markers up. Before we get to that, let's continue with the process that we were doing. We had been trying to address all of the marker could not be placed error messages. And by this point, there's only one left. The marker XV could not be placed, and there are 49 of them that couldn't be placed. So let's look at some of them. So here we see the XV marker, and it's in red. So can we tell why it's not being placed properly? Well, the marker just above it is a PL, and it's this funny sort of purplish color. And we haven't talked before about what the purple color means. So let's hover over it. And the problem description says, it says that it's optional, but it says check whether the marker should be moved up. So what does that mean? So let's go look at the setting for PL. It says that its parent is LX. Now what that means is that this is an entry-level marker, but let's look at where it occurs. So it's occurring after all of these sense-level markers, the meaning and the reversal and the part of speech. And so it's occurring within the sense, but it's claiming to be entry-level. And if we look at the indentation, we see that it's indented at the same level as the SN marker, which means that Solid thinks that it's a sibling of SN, which it would be if it were entry-level. So the purple refers to things that are at a higher level. The settings say that they should be at a higher level than they seem to be in the data. Now, the reason that this is marked as optional is that sometimes it's perfectly natural that the item right before it was at a lower level. And there's no problem whatsoever. So a lot of times I don't even look at the consider moving up messages. It is good to take a glance at them and see what they're talking about, but I wouldn't get too worried about them. But in this case, we do need to think about the PL. But so this draws out another lesson that's really important in Solid. We started by looking at XV, but when we drilled down and looked at the actual problem, we found that the problem was really with the PL marker, not with the XV marker. And so it's really important to realize that just because a message claims that a certain marker has a problem, that may not in fact be the marker with the real problem. It may be a problem with some other marker is making it look like this one has a problem. And that's another reason that it's important to try to deal with the highest level markers first. There is a lot of flexibility in terms of what order you deal with things, and the more you work with Solid, the more you'll develop intuitions about what order to deal with things. But keep your eyes open for a situation like this, where the problem isn't really with this exact marker, it's with something else. So at this point, I'm going to abandon my quest to figure out what's wrong with XV, and I'm going to look at the PL. And so now I actually do want to come down to the message where it says consider moving PL up. So here it says there are 18 occurrences of PL, and the ones that might need to be moved up, there's 18. So every single one of them has an issue. So I will click on this to filter just for the PL. And okay, so the next question to ask, the settings said that it should be at the entry level, and in the data it's at the sense level. And so again, we come to our same question of, should I adjust the settings or should I adjust the data? And certainly if you adjusted the settings, then this would parse. You could say this is at the sense level. But our job as import specialists is we are supposed to think about, A, what makes sense for the data, and B, what will work with flex. In flex, plural is not a built-in field, it's a custom field, so you could put it at either the entry level or the sense level. But let's think about lexicography principles. So plural is a field that relates to the form of the word. Typically, fields that relate to the form are at the entry level. Fields that relate to the meaning are the ones that are at the sense level. Because the idea is that if there's more than one sense, it's because it has a different meaning. And so any field that might be different for the different meanings needs to be at the sense level so that each sense can have a different value for that. Now, if this was a word where the different senses each had a different plural form, okay, on one hand, maybe you could justify putting the plural at the sense level, but on the other hand, if the word has different plurals for the different meanings, then you may in fact want to think about actually making it separate entries, that it probably should be homographs if they're that different. Normally, a word would have just one plural for all of its different meanings. And if it had a different plural, that's a good clue that it should be a completely different entry. So in this case, I would recommend putting the PL at the entry level. So I don't want to change the settings. The settings are good. It should be under LX. But we do need to change the data. So we could do it one at a time. And certainly with 18, that's not a lot, but it's not uncommon to find data where there are hundreds that have the PL at the sense level. Now, it would also be a fact that you need to look at any entry that has more than one sense and see if the PL is in both senses, and if it is, if it's the same, or if it's different, and you do need to be careful about those. Now, this data has very few entries that have two senses. So for the most part, I'm going to treat it as if it's all one sense and the PL is in the single sense. So it's a little bit of a toss-up, but the order does matter. It does need to be before the sense marker. It either needs to be before all the sense information or after it. So DT is at the entry level also. And that always comes at the end. But most entry-level fields, apart from DT, we like to have at the beginning of the record. So there is another way besides doing it manually, and that's what I want to show you now. In the menus, there's this menu item called Fix, and that's for quick fixes. Well, okay, there's a number of ways you can fix things. There are recipes for find replace. There's a number of different things you can do. There are quick fixes. You can make markers real, which we'll deal with in a different lesson. You can create GUIDs, which we're also not going to address. We want to go into the quick fixes option. Now, under quick fixes, there are a number of them. Note that there are tabs across the top. And the very first tab is for move up. And this is the one we want to use right now. Now, for a lot of these, there is this big caution. Warning, this is very dangerous. And anytime you do one of these quick fixes, you do run the risk of making a big mess of your data. And so it is very important to make backups, because the only way to recover from making a big mess like this is to revert to a previous backup, or if you're using source control like GitHub, to revert to a previous check-in. Now, if you've been doing what I suggested at the beginning and doing the save a copy and incrementally numbering the files, then you've been making backups, and so we have that step done. Okay, so in this dialog, what do we see? First, it wants to know which markers to move, and you could move several. I only want to move the PL, because this is a fairly risky thing. And again, I tend to do this pretty late in the process. I want to make sure that the rest of the structure is in good shape. Because again, if the other markers are not in shape, then I could also make a mess. And then it wants to know what it should be underneath. So these are fields that are also at the entry level. You could move it all the way up under LX. But typically, if there is an HM, it would come after LX. And if there's a citation form. So this is a good default. We'll accept it. And then it's asking, should I reduce the move amount? And, you know, if it has a choice about how high up to move it. I don't know the exact details of that. We won't go into that. I tend to leave it checked because it's a bit safer. It does say that it will tear parents away from their children, and that sounds very graphic. But what it means is that if the marker that you're moving is the parent of a cluster. For instance, if I had XV and then I had XE as its child, it's only going to move the XV. It's not going to move the whole cluster. So you do want to be careful with that. It works best with single fields and error-free files. So it's saying get the file as close to error-free as possible. Now, I'm doing this in order to get to being error-free, but get as far as you can towards that. Okay, and then it gives us some shortcuts that these are some common things that people want to do. And so if I were to click on this, then it would fill in those boxes. That gives us three options of things that are pretty common. Now, I've already filled in the boxes manually, so I'm not going to click any of those. But in case you wanted a shortcut. Now, in order to run this, what they've given you is this link, and the link says, I know what I'm doing and have backed up. So the authors of the program wanted to really make sure that you really knew what you're doing and that you really backed it up. They didn't just give you a button that you could just easily click without thinking. You have to actually read this link and consciously think, okay, I have indeed backed up. And I was making copies along the way, so I have. So I will click the button, and it told me that it did 18 changes. I'm going to go ahead, well, okay, let's look for our PL. So I'm going to click on PL, and now I see that it's above the SN, but it's below the LC. So let's click through a few more. Yes, so it has moved those up. That's looking really good. That's looking great. I could look through all 18, or I could stop. Now, I had not clicked save yet because I did still have a chance to rescue myself. If I didn't like it, I could quit without saving, and then I wouldn't need to revert to my backup. But I like what I'm seeing, so I'm going to click save, and I'm going to click recheck. And keep in mind that our XV was complaining before. We're hoping to have fewer XVs that are unhappy. Well, maybe there were more XVs. There were 50 XVs that were unhappy. It did a recheck for me. So I've dealt with the PL. Now we could look at the rest of these, and I may start on some that are have fewer. Sometimes I start at the bottom. So for instance, RE. Okay, let's look at this RE. Now, it's purple because the thing above it is indented more deeply than it is. But in this case, the GN is a child of GE, because that's the way that I set it up. But the GE is a sibling of RE. So GE and RE are both at the sense level, so this is perfectly fine. So this is a good example of one that I'm going to ignore. The only reason it's purple is because it has a nephew. And what I mean by that is that its sibling has a child, and the child came right before it instead of the sibling. So there's no need to worry about that. We don't need to get rid of the purple. We don't need to get rid of this message. It's not a problem. But I will click up to Note Import. And again, this one came after an example, and the XE is a nephew. That's okay, but let me click on to the next one. Now, in this case, it is a problem because I put it between the examples, and I didn't really mean to. So let's use our arrows to select this, and I'm going to do a cut, and I will move above the example, and I will paste it there. Let's do a save, and now that one parses. Okay, I'm not going to do a recheck yet. Let's look at the note. Note, that one is fine because it's after an example. Now this one is between example sentences. And so now I want to ask, is this note about the example that it comes after? It's on kaika to repeat, and it says the expression to do nothing but cannot help doing is translated by the verb followed by kaika, and again this verb at its proper tense. Now it just sounds to be about kaika, but so if I look up, kaika is what the LX is. So I think that this note relates to the whole entire entry. I don't think it relates to that example. So I'm going to manually move it. Because there were only 4, I'm not going to... Okay, let's see. And I will put it above the examples. Note is listed as coming at the sense level. So I do want it inside the sense. I just want it above the examples. And again, because there's only 4, I'm not going to do the move up thing. I haven't looked at all 4 of them. I wouldn't want to do it unless I had looked at all 4. And that's so few, I can do that by hand. So let's go on to the third one. And again, this one, it had a nephew, so that's not a problem. And then this one, it had a nephew. So we're good on that. I can ignore the note. I'll go ahead and do my recheck now. And I look. So that one's still there. Note import has 1 instead of 2. Note has 3 instead of 4. Let me check on this XV. And again, it's just because it followed a nephew. So I can ignore those. Now DE, yeah, again, it's the same thing. It followed a nephew, so I'm not worried about that. No problem with that. Okay, so the PS, and again, it's following a nephew, and we're not worried about those. Now the CF, there are 141 of them. Okay, so we do want to look at CF. Now let's look at the settings. We're telling it that it's at the entry level. Now a compare relation could be at the sense level or it could be at the entry level. Flex does expect it to be at the entry level. If you were going to say that this was at the sense level, you would need to change the setting in Flex before you imported it. Now here it's at the end of the entry, so it's a toss-up whether it relates to the sense or the entry. And that's at the end, that's at the end, and so far it looks like they're mostly at the end. So I'm just going to say they're really okay, that they really do belong at the entry level. And then date almost always is going to have this message because it's at the entry level and it comes after sense level things. So we won't worry about that. But let's go back up to this XV. So now there's only 40. And now, okay, we see here's a CF that came before the XV. Okay, so for that one, this one really is out of place. Again, the problem is not with the XV, the problem's with the CF. So I will cut that and I will paste it after and I will do a save and then there's no more red. And so then I can go one at a time. Now, I can sit here and cut and paste, or maybe I just want to scroll through. Okay, here's a different kind of error. Here we have the lexeme form and the citation, and then we immediately have an example. And there is no gloss, there is no sense, there's no nothing. So I'm going to put in the SN and a GE. I don't know what they are, but if we need the SN for the structure. So I will click save, and now it parses. Okay, so I could go through these. Okay, so I've seen a number of CFs. Let's do the move up on CF and then come back and see where we stand. Okay, so keep in mind that there were 40 XV with a problem and 141 CF that needed to move up. There's nothing for move down. Let's go ahead and move them to the top of the record, even though the ones that were at the end were perfectly fine. Let's do our quick fix, and we will tell it we want to move up the CF and move it up to the same place. Yes, I know what well, okay, I did not back up in between, so let me stop, because I did the move up on the PL, and I want to save that work. So let me save a copy, and so this new copy will be 16. And let me pull up my note file. So I already said that I started on XV and I was looking at move up for PL and CF because I thought I would do that, but I only did it for that. I moved up PL. And now I've copied to what a mod 16.txt. And sometimes I'll write what I'm about to do. Look at CF for move up. I haven't done it yet, but I just want to make my note just in case. Okay, so let's go back and we will do a quick fix. We're on the move up tab. The marker I want to move is CF. I want to move it below those things. Now I did make a backup. Hang on. Okay. I made a copy, but I didn't exit. Okay, I'm still on 15. I meant to do that on 16. So here we go again. Let's close and let's find our 16 that we made and open that up. See, that's really easy to do, like I said, and there's probably a better protocol, but anyway, that's what I got in the habit of doing. Okay, quick fix, move up, move CF, and this time I really have made up my backup. Number 15 was my backup, 16 is the one I'm doing this in. So now I do know what I'm doing. Made 148 changes. It ran a recheck for me, and so now there are only 4 XVs that are a problem. Do you see how I was fixing CF and it made the XVs be better? So don't waste your time on trying to fix something when that's not the marker that has the problem. Take the time to figure out which marker is causing the problem and then go ahead and sidetrack. Go look at the marker that is causing the problem and fix that. So first we looked at PL and then we looked at CF. Let me click a save. And now I want to click on this and see what those 4 are. Okay, this is another one without an SN. I don't need the GE, I'm just doing it for myself. And this needs a SN. And then this one also needs a SN. And this one. SN, GE, let's do a save. That was the last one. Let's do a recheck. Now there are no more messages about a marker that could not be placed. So we're nearly done. I do want to look at these required fields. It's claiming, okay, we said that SN had to occur under LX, and that is a good idea. It doesn't technically need it, but if I were to put one in, I would put it after the CF. Okay, we don't really, these will come in fine. This is like a minor entry or something, but I'm going to do it just to get rid of the error messages. Last one. Okay, see, this has nothing. It's just a Lexeme form and date. So I will click save and I will click recheck. And okay, I missed 3. Okay, I'm not going to do those. Required fields missing under XV. I told it that it needed an XE, but it doesn't really. So this is where I'm going to come back and I will get rid of that little marker. If it will open for me. Okay, I'm going to say it's not required. So sometimes we do settings because we want to learn something about the structure of the data, but it's not really what we're trying to say about what it's supposed to be. It's just temporary, and then we uncheck it, and we'll do save and a recheck. And now the only error messages left are the ones that we've already investigated, and we've confirmed that they are nothing. It's quite common to have lots of considers there. Don't feel like you have to get rid of those. And the required field, it isn't really required. So I would say that we are done. We have completely processed this file with Solid. And so now we're ready to move on to the next step in the import process. Good news, we've completely processed this file with Solid.